We purposely kind of load our afternoon speakers with folks with a little more high energy. Not that our morning speakers weren't good, they were, but we know that it's really challenging to have the right kind of energy. And our first speaker is Jennifer Adair, who's in charge of EEO programs for the Ohio Department of Administrative Services. I heard her do a program in December, right when this issue really started getting hot. One thing I remember, she basically said there's nothing in Ohio law directly on sexual harassment. It derives from federal court decisions, so it makes it tangled, and I think at some point the legislature or Congress is going to have to look at this more and define it better. But Jennifer went to Northwestern University. That's the one that's in the Big Ten that has all the eggheads and the intellectuals that go there. And I had a friend, my son had a good friend in high school that went to Northwestern, and he said the change from high school, where he was one of 2 or 3 kids that were really smart, you go to Northwestern and you look around, everyone in your class is really smart. It's kind of, I think, an intimidating environment. I'm glad I went to Ohio State. That was more comfortable for me. A law degree from Capitol, but has also been worked in the Ohio Attorneys General in this area, and is also very active in the community. I live in the Clintonville area, North Columbus, just south of Cook Road, if you've seen that exit on I-71, and she's about 1.5 miles on the other side. So we're almost kind of neighbors, but I'm happy to introduce Jennifer. Then we're going to have our break at 1:45, and then we're going to come back with the 2-hour grand finale, and Jennifer will be part of that program. So it's all yours, Jennifer.
Thank you. So yeah, we are neighbors, but I live on the other side of the freeway. So if anybody is familiar with Columbus, I live in Linden. And it's amazing, right, what a freeway can do and the perception of the neighborhood, right? But I am really excited to be here. And, you know, I'm excited that you guys signed up for this conference knowing that we were going to talk about sexual harassment all afternoon. So what I do is I work for the Department of Administrative Services Equal Opportunity Division, and what my unit does is run the internal discrimination complaint process for the state of Ohio. And we also do a lot of trainings, and we are also working on diversity and inclusion plans with all of our agencies right now. So if you have any questions about any of that stuff, grab my information. I would love to talk to you about it. It's something I'm passionate about. But we are here to talk about sexual harassment today. Who in here has had sexual harassment training before? Yeah, who found that super helpful? I know, right? Okay, so we are going to do some of that compliance stuff. I want to make sure you understand, you know, the basis, what we're talking about, but we're also going to talk about it in a little bit of a different way today. We're going to focus on prevention and what you can do right now, things you can go back and talk to your staff about, and things you can actually implement right now. And then we're going to continue after the break, after we get our yummy dessert. We're going to have a panel, and we're going to talk even more about things that are impacting your work environments right now, and hopefully giving you some really great tools that you can walk out of the door and use, right? It's more than compliance. We know compliance didn't work, right? So we have to add more. Now, I'm also a walker, so I'm really sorry that I'm going to be up here like, but the mic wasn't working, so I'm kind of stuck here, so it's weird for me. So sorry about that. If I get distracting, just be like, calm down. Okay. So here's our training objectives for today. So I am going to talk to you really briefly about what is employment discrimination, because we have to understand that in the context of being an employer. Then we're going to talk about sexual harassment and what it is, and then we're going to talk about prevention. And we're going to talk really fast through these things, because really the heart of what we really want to talk about is when Julie and Mark join me up on stage later, is that panel. Okay, so there's a bunch of laws. There's a bunch of laws that govern employment discrimination. And you heard this morning from the Attorney General's office, and they are who represents the state in these employment cases. You guys, for your various levels, it's either your county prosecutor or maybe your city attorney. They would be the ones representing you. And under federal law, there's several types of discrimination laws that prohibit discrimination in the employment setting. And you know these, some of these. Maybe there's a couple in here that you're like, what is that one? So you know the Civil Rights Act. That's something you learned about, where you lived through it. You know what this one is. This is the race. This is the gender. This is religion. This is the heart of what we know in those protected statuses. And then we have other laws that add additional statuses like the age discrimination. We have disability. We have genetics, and you might be like, what the heck is that one? Well, that one comes into play a lot when we're talking about decisions, especially for like healthcare. When you go in and get a blood test, right, or you have to do some kind of physical where we're getting your genetic information, we can't use that in a way that may lead to an employment decision that would discriminate against you based on information that we've learned from that's not pertaining to the direct question. And so that's kind of an interesting one. So any of you, where's my HR peoples? Oh, lots of you. Yay. Okay. Any EEO officers in here? Anyone do EEO investigations? One? Yes, girl. Yes. Woo! I know how hard your job is. Oh, we got another one. Okay, over here too. And then we have military protections as well. Any veterans, active military in here? Yeah, so you have protection as well. Now, under the state, we have the Ohio Civil Rights Commission that for Ohio lets us know that a lot of these same protections are in play. It establishes the commission that handles not only employment discrimination, but other types as well, like housing. And they are a great resource. They have a great website. Ohio Administrative Code 123.149 is what establishes my unit. It establishes for employees of the state of Ohio a state EEO coordinator. And so we do both employee side and we also do procurement side. So any of you do anything with MBEs? Okay, couple? Well, yes, she's in the state though. So those kind of specialized procurement programs for minority business, women-owned business, veteran business, we do that too in our unit. The most important policies, and I think you heard Attorney Larry James up here talk about this as well, are yours. Your agency policies. Those are the most important things. Those are the things that tell your employees, your staff, what rights they have, the processes that they need to, go through, and they're your protection. They're your shield as an employer if you do end up getting sued on these things. So you want to make sure they're reviewed and they're tight. And I think Aaron said that. Make sure you have policies that are reviewed and up to date. So really quickly, I just want to kind of give you a list of what an employment-related decision is, because sometimes there's question about that. And you kind of got a little bit of that throughout the day when different speakers have been up here talking about hiring or firing. But it's also things that are called a condition of employment. And so where someone sits or how they clock in or things that they're subject to just by coming in the door, those things can also be a term and condition. The culture, your work culture, is a term and condition. That's where we start when we talk about hostile work environment. That's where that comes in. And as an EEO employer, you make promises to employees. So who in here knows, do you work for an EEO employer? You think so? I'll tell you what it is. So as an EEO employer, we make promises. The state of Ohio is one. We make promises to our employees and to people who apply for jobs with us that any of those decisions that I showed you about employment related are based on non-discriminatory and objective criteria, okay? And this is how you know you're subject to laws. First of all, if you're in HR, you're probably doing some kind of report called EEO-something. And you're submitting that to the federal government. But if you are an employer with 15 or more employees who work at least 20 calendar weeks, you are probably subject to EEO. So now, who's an EEO employer? Yeah, okay. So a lot more of you put your hands up. And so that means that, these requirements do apply. You might have other requirements as well. I know some of our agencies have additional requirements because they get federal funding. I mean, you guys know, especially HR people, there's a lot of different requirements that we have to follow. So employment discrimination is the unfair treatment based on a protected class status. That's discrimination. That's what you would traditionally think of. But it's a lot more, too. It includes harassment, which is a separate claim. And it also includes when someone asks for a reasonable accommodation and then making that request, there's some kind of action taken against them. And then retaliation. Now, you heard about retaliation from one of the speakers today, and I'm going to take a second and dig into that a little more, especially for my HR peeps, because there's something interesting that happens between the HR world and EEO when it comes to these retaliation claims. And so retaliation in the world of EEO is not street retaliation. Okay, it's not like the type where you're like, yeah, it's not like the type where you're like, I'm going to get back at you because it's not what we're talking about. And you heard, I think it was our last speaker talk about you had to avail yourself of some EEO protection. And I just want to take a pause on that because employees sometimes don't know. And so we get a lot of claims of people claiming retaliation when it's not EEO retaliation. And then they get all confused and upset, like, no, but they did this because I did this. And it's like, yeah, but you never filed anything first. You didn't avail yourself of the EEO protections first. So here's kind of the list of protected activity that the employee would first need to do before they could file a claim for retaliation, okay? So file a case, whether that be through an internal process that you guys have or whether it be with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission or the Equal Opportunity Commission. So filing a case, reporting a case. So they go to a manager, they go to a HR person, they go to their EEO. Making that filing, that report will avail protection. Participating as a witness. So EEO, you guys know. And HR people, you know too, because the people are out. EEO cases are very fact-intensive, some of them, and it takes a lot of witnesses to come in, to say what happened, because it's he said, she said, she said, he said, she said, he said, she said, right? That's what it is. That's these cases. And so when your employee has been asked to participate as a witness, the manager should not discipline them for not being at their desk, because they're being asked to participate in this process. Refusing to follow orders that result in discrimination. So who has something called or something similar to a direct order in your agency? So if an employee is not doing something, they refuse to do it, a manager can give that person a direct order, and then if they don't do it, then there's additional discipline. Do you guys have something like that? Well, we do at the state, and if an employee, if they're given a direct order by their manager, and that order would result in discrimination, that employee not following it, that means that we can't discipline them because the result would be discrimination. Here's an example. Any of your agencies deal with like licensure, where you're issuing licenses to groups of professionals or people or something like that? Okay. So let's say you're the manager and you license, and you tell your subordinate, I think we got enough women. No more women. They can't hold the licenses, right? Direct order you must follow. And if that employee says, I know that's discrimination, I am not following that order, and they report and they do everything they need to do, I as the manager cannot discipline. And if I do, that could be retaliation, okay? Resisting sexual advances or intervening to protect another. So that intervening to protect another is the thing I really want to focus on here. We all need to be upstanders, not bystanders. We all need to be upstanders in this world of preventing harassment and discrimination in our workplace. That means that if we see something, we say something, and if we see someone who lost their voice, we're able to step in and help them. And if you do that, if you step in and you help someone who's lost their voice, you are protected because you're protecting their right and you're protecting your work environment, okay? And the last one, requesting a reasonable accommodation. So under law, if you need a accommodation based on religion or disabilities, making that request, we cannot have an adverse action against you in the employment context because you have a right to that, okay? So where's my HR peeps again? Okay, so HR people, has anybody in your agencies ever filed you got them under some discipline, right? They're not great. They're not great employees. And you got them under some discipline, and then they turn around and they file an EEO case on you, on somebody. Yeah, okay, thank you for being honest. Yeah, so I will tell you that happens a lot in the state. And so there is an interesting relationship between EEO and HR, okay? And we do see that. And what I tell our managers and what I reassure our HR people is that EEO is not a shield to HR discipline, okay? If as HR you are doing everything you need to do and you have that employee, you've got the paperwork and you're doing everything, you're following all your work rules, and you want to fire them, but before you can do it, they turn around and file an EEO case, that isn't that retaliation I was talking about if you fire them, because you have a reason to fire them. Those lists, it's only if, retaliation is only if that was your only reason. Does that make sense? So it is not a shield, and we do see that a lot in the state. We see that a lot where bad employees decide they're going to, try to block HR, and they file, and we reject those cases because that's not what EEO is. And so there is this interesting kind of relationship between the world of EEO and HR. And some of you in your agencies, it's in the same place. It might be the same person, but there is a really interesting dynamic. So if you think about it kind of on this, we have HR that is really in charge of compliance and enforcement rules for employees, right? The workforce, they decide the policies and the procedures. They do compliance on their own as well. EEO is legal. I mean, this is legal stuff, right? We have code, we have things that we have to follow, and if we don't, there is liability. There could be serious liability. So there are some things that are totally EEO, some things that are totally HR. Where the biggest problem is all that stuff in the middle. And you guys know this, you live in it, right? And a lot of this determines, what are my managers doing? What's my work culture like? A lot of this stuff that you guys kind of heard bits and pieces of from speakers today falls in this kind of middle category. It could be in HR, it could be EEO, we don't know yet. Is it bad enough? All right, and so it really takes a good communication between your EEO and HR and a good idea and thought process about how you're going to work through cases to make sure they end up in the right pile. Because if you have an EEO case that didn't end up over in EEO world in the legal side and should have, your agency could have liability because you didn't address it appropriately under the law. Okay. So let's talk about sexual harassment. So harassment is unwelcome conduct that is based on a protected class status. Okay? Who in here is a member of a protected class? Raise your hand. If your hand is not up, please raise it. Okay, so this is a misconception, right? Truthfully, if you think about those broader categories of what it protects gender. Do you all have a gender? Okay. It protects age. Sometimes it protects, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on where you are on the age scale. But you all have an age, right? Some of you said you were in the military, so it protects you. Some of you may have a visible or hidden disability. It protects you. You have, what am I missing? There's a lot of them I'm missing. Yeah, age. I said that one. But yeah, it protects a lot of things that we don't think. So, everybody has to understand they have a stake in this when we're talking about harassment. It is possible to harass a white male. I know. But it is possible. And so it's important that everybody is at the table having these conversations to prevent it, okay? So when you go back to your agencies, I want you to remind people that this applies to everyone, all right? It's important. Now, as an employee, you can be harassed by your supervisor, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, an agent of the employer, so if any of you use contractors, things like that, or a visitor. So as the employer, we have the responsibility to keep the entire work environment free of harassment and discrimination, okay? Now, I've been asked this question by my supervisors, because that's who I'm doing a lot of the in-person training with. And they say, can I be harassed? Well, sure. I mean, anybody can be harassed, but the question is it Does it rise to the level of EEO? Do you have legal protection? I think that's what you're really asking me, right? And it's a very narrow situation where that can happen, but it can happen. And cases I've looked at are where the manager is a middle manager, and they report to somebody higher. And they may have a serious problem where their subordinates are discriminating. They are, treating them badly. They're saying things. It's a hostile work environment for them. And they go to their supervisors or superiors and they report this, and what they get back is, you're a manager. Just deal with it. So managers, middle managers in particular, are still employees, guys. They're still employees. And as an employer, we still owe them protection, okay? And so it's important to remember, if you have that case and you have a manager that's coming to you, that you need to help them and deal with the situation. Whether that be give them more training, because maybe it really is them and not, but address it in some way, okay? So it is possible. It is possible. And the case is not against the employees. Her case was against the employer, because as their employee, they didn't do what they needed to do to protect her from a hostile work environment. So here's the definition of sexual harassment. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature, including offensive remarks about a person's sex. Unwelcome means the employee did not solicit or incite the conduct and regards it as undesirable or offensive. So the biggest question I get right here involves dress code. Oh yeah, see, now I just put a picture in your mind about who that was, right? So you got that person who's, on the border of that dress code. Some people may have come to you and said, oh, we have a problem with this person, the way they dress. And so this is what I say about dress code. Dress code itself is an HR issue. It's a work rule. You guys you've determined what is appropriate, what not appropriate to wear. Please just make sure that rule is complied with, right? Eliminate problems at the lowest level. Our biggest problem is we don't like conflict, and we have a hard time telling people that we don't like what they wear, right, to them, right? And so we have to do better. We have to provide environments where managers have the skills to have these conversations. Because what happens? Well, the conversations are not had. And then that person over time, feels like people are staring and people are leering and people are making additional comments, and then it's not addressed. And then maybe one day they file an EEO case. And perhaps there's enough there to make it a hostile work environment. So these things are hard. These kind of people-to-people human relationships is hard, right? And that's what all of EEO is. Basically, a lot of this starts off with one misunderstanding or misinterpretation that's not addressed, and it keeps building over time. Because we don't have the skills as people to talk about the hard stuff. We don't talk about race, right? We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about those things because we've been told that that's not appropriate. But here's the thing. It happens. It's infiltrating our work environments. You can't pretend what's happening on the other side of the doors is not impacting your employees. And that's the biggest part. We all need to open our eyes and start addressing how does this impact our work environment. So there's two types of sexual harassment. The first is when it becomes a condition of continued employment. You know this is quid pro quo, okay? You've heard that word, yeah? Okay. So when there is a, you must do this to keep your job, to be promoted, to, have an advancement in your career. You must subject yourself to this thing I am telling you. Now, most times it's not as blatant as you have to sleep with me to get the job or the promotion. Most times it's not that blatant. It's a lot of innuendo. It's a lot of feelings between people, which makes it hard, right? The second type is when it becomes severe or pervasive to create a work environment that a reasonable person would consider hostile. You know this is hostile work environment. Yes, you've heard that? Yeah, okay. So those are the two types. I want to talk a little bit about hostile work environment for a second and talk about this concept of severe or pervasive. So on one side, you have things that are so bad in the work environment, just so bad that we are just going to know right away that this is a problem. It's sexual harassment. The employer must stop it now. Okay? These kind of things are easy. This is the easy case. We don't get this case a lot. This is the easy case, right? The case where somebody, pushes someone up against a wall, gropes them, says things, shows them, they expose themselves. These are the kind of things, right? You would all agree that's not appropriate. Any of those examples, not appropriate, right? Okay. Where it gets harder is when we start moving up that spectrum over to the pervasive side, where things just are. It is part of the work culture and work environment, and people who walk in the door every day are subject to it. That's the hard part, because one, people aren't necessarily coming forward because they get really desensitized to it, or just believe that this is what I have to deal with. If anybody ever uses those words in your presence, I have to deal with that, or you have to deal with it, or we're dealing with it, please take a step back and put your little red flag up and say, deal with, because nobody should have to deal with anything in a work environment. That means somebody needs to be doing something. The employer should be looking at something, a policy, a procedure, a training, something, because we pay our employees to do work, not to deal with things, right? So it becomes part of the work environment. And these are harder cases. I put Me Too up here, and we're going to talk a lot about that in the panel. But these situations where, if you think about Hollywood, you think about what was going on, it's pervasive, it's throughout. Some of those individual cases, though, were more severe. Now, why do we focus on this, and why do I keep saying it's so hard? Because, guys, as managers, as employers, we're supposed to stop something, right? At some point, we have to step in on this spectrum and say, this is harassment. We have to stop. We have to stop this. And so it takes a lot of training. It takes support for your EEO officers, proper resources, training for your employees to understand where the lines are and where things can't be crossed. Each case is different. Each case is very fact intensive, and it's really hard. This stuff is really hard. A few notes about it. So a lot of times when we get the person who is accused of the harassment, and they sit down with the EEO officer, they'll say, that's not what I meant, though. I didn't intend for that person to feel that way. So, sorry. Well, okay. We don't just be like, oh, our bad, forget it. No, that's not what we're talking about. In the world of sexual harassment, it is the impact. It's the impact of the conduct, not the intent. Now, the intent is important. It is a factor in the investigation, but it's not a defense. It still goes forward, okay? It still goes forward, and that's what is more important when we look at what happened. Another is this really cool concept of a reasonable person. Now, where's my lawyers? Lawyers, yeah. So I'm geeky lawyer. I love this. This standard is awesome. It protects us. It's so cool. So who in here is a reasonable person? None of you are. The reasonable person is a fictitious person. It's that person that will have ordinary reason and expectation, and just everything is just, really even keel. We are not reasonable people because we're real, and we have feelings and thoughts and bubbles we live in and things that impact us differently. So that's why we're not reasonable people. And this is really great because what it does is it protects against that person that you know and love, but they're always in HR's office. You know them. We love them. Okay, but so sometimes it's the hypersensitive person, right? Where everything is just really challenging in life and everything is offensive, and perhaps EEO is not the place for them. Perhaps you have other people that can help and provide assistance to them. In the state of Ohio, we have what's called OEAP, which could provide additional mental health or other type of support. I'm not laughing. They're a great resource. It's true. We want to make sure that employee is heard and feels valued, and that what they're saying is we are listening to it. But it's not an EEO complaint, right? So that's important. But it also protects on the other side against that work environment that has been so desensitized because it is just part of the culture. So what we look at then is we say, okay, if we all work together, and all of a sudden in this room we have posters of women in bikinis, maybe some of you hung them up, and we're like, yeah, these are great. And then we have someone from the outside come in, maybe a new employee, and they're like, this is a problem, and we're like, no, it's not a problem. No, we all like it, all of us, every single one in this. No one has a problem with it, right? Well, so a court, what they would do is take this reasonable person, pop them in the middle of the room, and say, look around, reasonable person, do you have a problem with it? And that reasonable person might say yes, even though all of us, like literally all of us, said no. We have become desensitized. The law is not desensitized, right? And that is what the reasonable person does. So it's really cool. It has like this layer of protection. But I hate to tell you, you're not reasonable people, okay? Under the law. So here's a list of conduct that has been pulled from cases. Now you may say, wow, I am never going to be able to talk to a single human again. I need to stay away from people. Where's my 3-foot radius? Okay, that is not what I want you to take from this. Now, some of these examples have come from cases that were from hostile work environments. So you'll see lots of them built up over time, right? And that's how they end up on the list. Some of them are very severe. And so questions I've had about some of these center around like terms of endearment. Anybody a honeyer? Anybody want to admit to being a honeyer? Okay, my boss is a honeyer and she'll admit to it. It's great. But the problem is with that is it's really not a problem for her because nobody finds it unwanted. She doesn't do it in a way that is demeaning. So again, these things are so individual and so personal. Now, if someone did come into our work environment who totally found that offensive and they told her and she didn't stop, then we have a problem, right? I also have had questions about the difference between staring and leering. It's an intent issue, so leering has more malice in it, more like I want to intimidate you, not just I'm staring at you, right? It's I'm trying to intimidate you. So similar, but there's a little intent difference. I've had questions about rape. Why is rape on this list? That's criminal. Yes, it is criminal. Good job for knowing that. But it also, under a civil context, it fits the definition. It is unwanted sexual conduct, right? And so, yes, a person who, hopefully that would never happen in a work environment, but that person could not only be subject to criminal, but, civil penalty and liability as well. So just because something's criminal, it still can be sexual harassment. I want to talk about screensavers for just a second. So screensavers. I have made you all EEO officer now. You investigate. Congratulations on your promotion. You have received a case on your desk, and this is the facts, and my officers will know this is like literally how they come in. This is all you know. An employee has made a complaint that on a manager's desktop screensaver, there is a picture of a naked female. Got it? That's all you know right now. So you go in, you walk in. What's on your screensaver? You walk around, and you find a picture of an infant, baby, newborn picture all curled up. I mean, she is naked, yes, but it's one of those kind of pictures. Is that a problem? Maybe? No? Yeah, okay, I don't know. It's a baby picture. Okay, so now instead of that, what you see is a picture of a 6-year-old in a bathtub. Problem. Getting there. Okay. All right, so now what you see is a picture of a family vacation where there are teenage girls in very little bikinis on a beach. Problem. Okay. You guys all have high tolerance. Wow. Okay. So now what you see when you go in is a picture that is probably from Google of a woman in very skimpy lingerie that you can see through. Problem. No. You're like, no. Where do you work? No, just kidding. So they all could be problems. The question is, a problem for who and what, okay? So remember, again, this is that interplay between HR and EEO, all right? So that baby picture may not yet be enough, or it could be, depending on what else is happening, to create a hostile work environment. But it may be a work rule violation, right? It may be a work rule violation. And it really, truly may be offensive to someone. And then the question is that hypersensitive? So it's a lot harder than just saying things. And you all have different individual levels of tolerance. Like some of you are like, oh, baby picture, that's fine. You know, I remember one of my trainings, I had someone come up and say, you know what, I'm going to take down all those baby pictures of my kid. And I was like, no, that's not what we mean. Like, that's not what we mean, right? But that example is to show you how hard this is. And really, to fix the problem, like, let's start at the base. How many of you have a policy about what can be on your work computer screensaver? Anybody? Anybody have, do you know? Maybe you don't even know. Go back to HR and ask them. Because there probably is a rule. It's probably a rule that hasn't been enforced in a while. Probably one that maybe people don't know about. And so that's the important thing, is to remember to hit these at the base level. So what can we do? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this report. I provided it in the electronic material, like the full report, but it's on the website for the EEOC, okay? This is a report that was done in 2016 that talks about harassment in the workforce. Now, EEOC covers both private and public, so think about that when you are reading some of this as well. And it was before Me Too, so think about that when you're looking at it. Here's a percentage. 60 to 75%. Who wants to guess what that is? What do you think that number represents? 60 to 75% of women, this report found, have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. I actually just saw a different report a few weeks ago, since the Me Too movement has come about, 81%. What's interesting about this number is in the way they ask the question and people's understanding about what it encompasses. If it was just asked, have you been sexually harassed? The report says the number drops down to 50%, which is still a lot, but it drops to 50%. If given examples of sexual harassment, the number increases. And then when given examples with the definition that it includes gender-based, this is where you start seeing it come up into the 75, maybe 81%, what the last report showed, okay? 70%. 70% of people affected do not say anything. Nothing. And those that do, 85% of them choose not to file anything. Why do you guys think that there's underreporting? Shout it out. Yeah, they won't be believed, so a work culture. Maybe they've seen people try and fail. Maybe they've seen retaliation. That's a huge one. Now, in public sector, we do have a little more protection than in private sector about that, but it still happens. It still happens in the public sector. And also just people who are victims. I mean, if any of you work in that space with victims, you know there's kind of a psychology about being a victim, and sometimes there's victim blaming, right? So there are reasons, and the report goes through some of those reasons on why people do not report. It finds that it is a persistent problem that goes unreported. It's happening in the state of Ohio right now. It's happening in your workplaces right now, and we all need to open our eyes to it, right? Leadership and accountability are critical. It starts at the top. You heard another speaker say that. It starts at the top. And when we say accountability, managers need to be accountable for what their work culture, what their work environment is under them. So HR, think about using your performance evaluations a little differently. Adding in those pieces that impact work culture. We need a new and different approach to training. How many of you do web-based training? Where your employees get to just sit at it and click some stuff, half listen. Anybody? No, yeah, we do that. I mean, it's an efficient way. You can train a lot of people, but in truth, it really doesn't have that big of impact when we're talking about solving real problems, right? We also have to think about training more informally. Because this stuff doesn't stop when you leave this room. Like, this could be considered a formal training, but it doesn't stop. We need to add things like informal training. Who has a diversity committee or employee network groups or work groups or even like a book club, for goodness sakes? Who has employees come together and share and do something, right? All right, a lot of you do. Who lets your employees do that on work time? Oh, a few of you. That's great. A lot of us don't. In the state, we don't. Those things are relegated to your lunch. But see, all of that's training. Training on how people can communicate. And so we have to think about what training is in a broader scale. And the report talks about that. There's an added and compelling business case, even for government. This stuff saves money. The prevention side saves money, and we need to put resources into the prevention side. And it's all of us. Okay, it's not, you can't just blame that one harasser or that one person that's discriminating, because the truth is we are all allowing it to happen. We all need to be better upstanders, okay? So the report, I'm not going to read through these, but when you look at this report, there's a whole list of factors that make your work environment maybe more susceptible to harassment of all types. Take a look at it. See where there are impacts in your workplace and have real conversations with your managers about those, and see if there's prevention. Those questions that Attorney James provided, some of those are really great starts too. So use that information. And where do we start? So leadership has to act with a sense of urgency. It has to be part of their priority, and it has to be felt by the employees in the organization. We need to ensure that there is efficient training and policy. Your policy is up to date. I can't say that enough. That's like the fourth time you've heard it today. It's super important. Allocate time and resources. So leadership, managers, and staff allow people to experience more of the prevention side of things in order to stop it. And delegate enough power and authority to those who can. So my EEO officers, to my HR people, I know the struggle. I know that you're doing 1,000 things. But if you guys believe in it, try really hard to argue why you need additional people and additional resources and additional power to get this stuff done. So here's my last some tools and tips that you guys can use to prevent. Make sure you update your EEO policy and your anti-discrimination harassment policy. Think about how you're holding your managers accountable for that and how you're utilizing it in a performance evaluation. Make sure that you think about a different approach to training and really look at how you're training and what you're training on. Compliance training is compliance training, and you can have it 1,000 times. But if you want something impactful, think about how it really can be impactful and try that. Make sure your employees understand that reporting is preferred, and we will not retaliate against. I tell my agencies, it's not the end of the world if someone reports. It gives us the opportunity to live up to that promise, right, of making sure that we are providing the best work environment we can. Make sure that if you do get a case, it is properly investigated, and the person doing the investigation has the time and the resources to get it done. I think Attorney James suggested having an outside person come in if that's what you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of ways to have these cases investigated. Now, this is an HR policy. Anti-bullying. Who has one of those? Some of you, good. I would really, that's something we're looking at the state. We're going to help our agencies work through and create an anti-bullying. And that's not EEO, but what it is, a prevention, right? It's a prevention. So that's something that's really good. And then also think about D&I initiatives. This is that broader, squishier, fun stuff about getting people to connect and understand one another. And these are the kind of programmings that can stop those misunderstandings and miscommunications between people and give them the words to talk. So I know we're at time, and I really want to get the panel up here. And we want dessert.
Got a minute and a half to wrap up. Any questions so far?
Does your office provide any sample policies?
Right now, so the question was, does my office have sample policies? So we do have model policies that are right now under review. We wanted to make sure that we have a good review, and those will be going out to our agencies soon. I'm happy to share. It's public record. Just contact me. They're not quite ready yet, but I can share them when they're ready.
A new trend that I've heard about in training is the civil workplace training. More of, I would take it a little bit below kind of bullying. Is that something we should consider in doing? I guess in my mind, I thought it was common sense.
Well, right. I mean, it should be common sense. But again, talking to people and having relationships is like the hardest thing ever. You know? And so if your workplace does need something like that, yes, definitely do it. And look into it. And if you don't need it now, even consider creating something or finding it as a best practice, because you never know when that one manager comes to you, HR people, and says, gosh, I have this problem. People are just so rude. And then you can say, oh, we have this great training we could do, or here's some resources, right? Because it all starts at that fundamental level. Anything you guys can proactively do to think about this is much better than it landing on your EEO officer's desk in a legal case, right? We don't like legal stuff. And no, I'm not talking myself out of a job.
My guess is there's some people itching for dessert. So Jennifer's not leaving. She'll be around here during the break, and then we'll start the main event.